For me, it like brings meaning to my life, just feeling connected to something.
I'm a Cancer sun. I collect vintage, so like nostalgia runs deep within me.
Happy Friday, light makeup slay. We're about to do our first podcast with Emily of Preloved podcast. So yeah, and then I have another one later today with Brooke from One Sick Kitten. So excited to start recording some of these virtual podcasts. It's new for me. So yeah, excited to just do a mixture of like people from LA, people not in LA. I think it'll kind of just give perspective of what it's like to be within the sustainable fashion space from multiple angles, if that makes sense. A lot of people I know are obviously in California, but I'm excited to get people's perspectives that aren't within the LA and Bay Area circles. So yeah, those videos are out. I'll make sure to link them up in the cards, but if not, stay tuned. You're gonna sit next to me while we do the interview? Here we go. Thank you, Emily, for doing this. Honestly, doing your podcast inspired me.
All right. Yeah, we met because of your podcast.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also just crazy knowing that you've been doing this for a while. To me, you're one of like the first sustainable fashion space podcasters.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've been doing it 5 years now, which is wild. And to me, I look up to Kestrel Drinkins, who has Conscious Chatter, and Claire Press, who has Wardrobe Crisis. Like, they were the only ones out there, like, doing it. Maybe not the only ones. They were the ones I was listening to, like, before
Yeah.
I got in the space. And I just have always approached sustainable fashion through the vintage and secondhand world. And so, like, when I really got into sustainable fashion and I was listening to podcasts and watching YouTube channels, I was like, oh, but the piece that I'm really interested in, which is like the vintage stuff, wasn't yet there. So that's how Preloved Podcast came to be.
Yeah. I wanted to start off like, where are you based?
I am in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So I'm in the Midwest. I grew up in St. Louis, and then I lived in New York in my early 20s. And then I married a nice small town Iowa boy.
Oh,
He works in his dad's restaurant, which has been here for 40 years. So we settled here and have a lovely little quiet Iowa life with a dog and a cat, and get to do all of this like from my computer, which I'm so fortunate to be able to do.
yeah, no, that's so cool. I just want to know, how did you get started within like the thrifting or secondhand fashion space? I'm from California. I also grew up in near big cities. I feel like I want to paint the picture of, the differences between like small town, and then you also lived in New York. So I feel like you have both to kind of like go between.
Yeah, so I probably got into thrift and secondhand around the time when I got my driver's license. And me and my best friend in high school would go to Goodwill or Plato's Closet. Like, that was what was in our town. And we'd go and just like find things. And I was very tomboyish. I was very bookish and nerdy. And like, I was not really into clothes. I would just like wear what I had. But for me, and I think this is a very common teen girl experience, like that was just so fun. Like going to the Goodwill with my best friend and like seeing what
Yeah.
crazy things were there and finding unique pieces and just starting to play. And so I think like for me, thrift is kind of what got me into fashion, because I was like, oh, there's interesting things out here. And I kept doing that. My friends in college, we would like go to Goodwill all the time. There was like a Goodwill by our college. When I met my now husband, we would go on like little Goodwill dates, and it's just always like so fun to have a wander around, because there's like endless things to talk about in a thrift store too, because it's so nostalgic and like full of memories and stuff. And then I lived in New York in my early 20s, and I probably just like kept thrifting there, honestly, because I had no money. So, I was in that place too. And like my whole, first professional wardrobe was like all thrifted pieces. So it was definitely for the fun, for the entertainment, for the practicality. And it's interesting how I then started to connect that to like sustainable fashion and my values, because I don't know that was like necessarily on my radar when I first got into it.
I feel the same way about like my own journey. me, it was something to do with my friends after school kind of thing. So it's kind of interesting making that connection because I definitely wasn't, oh my God, I want to save the world right away. I think that came a little later. So when you first started thrifting, what were the types of things you were looking for, or was it random?
Really random. Like, I was just thinking about this because I had no sense of like personal style. I kind of just wore like what other people wore at my high school, and I didn't really think too much about it. And so I had no sense of like what I liked or wanted to dress like. And I think I've always had this, like I said, like kind of artsy, like bookish, nerdy side of me. And so then when I would go into the thrift store and I would realize that there were like so many different things than what people were
Yeah.
wearing at my high school, I was like, oh, the options are there. And I would get like quirky little graphic tees. Like that was a big one. I still have it. It's such a strange thing, but I had this like purse that had a picture of the Brady Bunch characters on it. And I was like, this is me. Like this is the who I am. And I don't know why. And I think it was just like the thrift store kind of showed me that there were like different things out there than what everybody else had. And I thought that was really fun.
I feel like in a way, I think about how today, people like designers, they like give you a collection and they're like, here's your options. But the thrift store is a way, like a limitless way of doing that. Yeah, no, that's really cool. Like to hear you like explain that, especially saying you like didn't have like a sense of style or whatever. I'm sure you did, but just in that sense of like, you really didn't have a goal, and like how the thrift store kind of just brought it out of you in a way. So that's really
Yeah, I
like
think so. I think
interesting.
it helped me like figure out how to convey my personality externally, which is what style at its heart is meant to do. And I just
Yeah.
was not something on my radar that could be done. And
Would you say growing up, did you have any inspirations or influences that came to fashion? Like, how did it come to you before thrifting?
so as a little kid, I was either like reading or running around outside with a group of friends from the neighborhood, and pretty much all of them were boys. And I wore a lot of like, I played soccer, I wore Umbro shorts and Adidas Sambas, and like just did not really think about it a lot. And then my mom has always like picked out when I was little, like I look back on photos of me and she would always pick out really cute outfits for me. And
Oh,
honestly, like looking back, some of the 90s outfits that she put me in, I'm like, oh, I would wear that now if they came in adult sizes. Cute little sundresses with sunflowers all over, or like big collars or gingham and plaid. Like I was a 90s kid through and through, and all
yeah.
of those 90s style inspirations were definitely there. But it's really funny because you can kind of see sometimes in some of the photos the limitations that she was working with like me being me, because it'd be like a cute dress and then I'd have like LL Bean hiking boots on with it. I was like, would not wear any shoes that I said like pinched my toes, anything like that. And so it's kind of funny looking back. Most of the time when it would come to like picking up clothes for school and things like that would be like something my mom and I would do together. And she always, I think, had nice taste. And it was something that I
Yeah.
grew into on my own later on.
Feel like a lot of people, I've been thinking about doing this where I like ask people to submit their baby photos. We can all kind of have this time capsule, because I feel like a lot of 90s kids as kids were well dressed because of our parents. Like I feel like that's a collective experience for, I guess, millennials especially, for some reason.
It's so true. It's so true because I like 90s fashion.
Yeah.
Now as an adult, I think 90s fashion is really cute. And so I look back and I'm like, oh, that's so fun. But yeah, I do have a lot of nostalgia for 90s fashion, even though I wasn't like particularly thinking about it when I was a kid.
I think for me that's kind of how I started like my Depop journey. I feel like it was all 90s, and then I think it moved into the 2000s because I never thought that would be considered vintage, I guess, being in the vintage world.
I
Yeah, it's
always
just
say that like the
interesting.
longer we're in the vintage world, like we're just it's just always gonna come back for us. Like we're just gonna, because it's like, you know, so many times being in the vintage shop, there'd be a woman, maybe my mom's age, coming in and everything is like, oh, I wore this when I was a teenager. I wore this as a teenager, you know? And of course, like that's me now that it's like Y2K stuff.
I feel like when I mean, I always like the 2000 stuff. It's not to like diss 2000 stuff, but I guess in the sense of like, what is true vintage? What is not? Did you ever have, because now I'm fully like a 2000 girly, but I did resist it for a long time. I guess I'm just wondering if you had a similar feeling or how you felt about like Y2K fashion coming into play.
It's so interesting because okay, so like 2003 was 20 years ago, but like, you know, I feel like people used to talk about vintage as being 30 years older, and
Yeah.
now I feel like 20 is very accepted. Like 20 is a very accepted number, and it feels like it's almost going to keep getting shorter and shorter, and I think that's inevitable with just how the trend cycles are speeding up. And I'm not like a purist in that I'm like, no, it has to be 30 years or it doesn't count. Like, that's why I always say pre-loved, because like I'm not a purist about it like having to be vintage. Like, I do think about how that has sped up and what does that changing definition like mean for the state of fashion. I think tells us a lot. And I think it's going to be even more noticeable when we hit, because early 2000s fashion was still not the fast fashion crap that like comes in the later part of the 2000s. I think that's when we're really going to notice it, is when that's the stuff that's 20 years old, maybe 2008 and later. Because like, you know, when I was in high school in the early and mid 2000s, going to the mall and getting a couple of outfits for back to school was still like kind of a pricier, no, I'm not like, you know what I mean, but like it wasn't like going to Forever 21, you know?
No,
It was still a little bit pricier, and the clothes were still meant to last a little bit longer, even though it was from the mall and it was from brands that are now made a lot cheaper and a lot more quickly. And so I think that we'll really see that drop off coming in vintage pretty soon here, because you know the difference between say 2000 American Eagle and like 2010 or Gap, or you know, to pick your brand, but any of those mall brands that like we wore in the early 2000s that are still around have gone through that evolution of speeding up.
All those kinds, even Hot Topic.
It's
but
so
Old
true.
Navy was like, I don't know, that was where you got like your $10. I guess I don't remember, but that's how it felt.
Yeah, what was it, like the flip-flop deal? That's what comes to mind. And like the wall of flip-flops. And yeah, it is. It's just like the fashion industry has changed so much in the time that we've been alive that it's probably going to keep changing, but it does impact vintage for sure.
Like I just think that's how fast it's moving. I felt like there was a level of like predictability, like a reseller, as somebody that does it, I feel like there was more a level of predictability for me. I think what things have kind of shifted to is like being more about curating your own style now, because so many people are doing it.
Yeah, I think you're right. And that's cool. Like that there can be so many different aesthetics happening at once, right? That there's not like, you know, I think back to like 2004, 2005. And like I said, like I felt like everybody at my high school dressed exactly the same. And I feel like now when I look at teenagers, and maybe that's just being an outside observer, but like I just see so much more variety in how people are styling themselves.
Yeah, I think there's like people on both sides of that spectrum, because right now, at least, maybe it's because like LA feels like a bubble to me. And like, this is just what I hear people say. They're like, I feel like there's no originality anymore, like because of TikTok, because of whatever. I feel like people are, and I feel like I have mixed feelings on this, because I feel like there's a level of like, sure, you want to try out the new things, but I think people are trying to find their own style by copying sometimes, if that makes sense. But I don't know, that was just something that I've just like seen within the vintage space. Like everyone's wearing Jinkos, everybody's doing like the coquette trend. Like I feel like it's just maybe it's because it's happening so quickly, like in a moment.
Yeah, I think so. Personally, I think that figuring out your personal style just comes with age and comes with time, because once I did, like I said, I wasn't really into style in high school, but once I did get into it, maybe say college years, and I was like on Tumblr and like the early blogger days, like I was absolutely copying like the Alexa Chung it girls and like wanted to be exactly what they were wearing, or like the Zoe Deschanel twee era. Like, you know, I think that we all kind of go through that as we're growing up. And yeah, I look back on those memories and I'm like, oh, I can see the threads of like what I was getting at and how I felt that that was expressing me. You know, I was really into indie music. And so I feel like those references felt like they were expressing a little bit of me, but I didn't quite know how to do it yet. And so I was like doing it the way that other people did it, you know?
Yeah, totally. God, the Tumblr era was so epic for me. So going off that, what were maybe your favorite style eras that you went through, even if it was experimental? What were the most memorable?
Yeah, definitely that era. I was big Alexa Chung early, Tumblr, early YouTubers, early bloggers, the very, very thick, heavy bangs. Like I had those thick bangs and big glasses. And it was either like everybody was like the girlfriend of the guy in the band kind of vibe. Yeah, I loved, you know, you had the Alexa Chung cool girl, and then you kind of had Zoe Deschanel, that era's like girlier twee sister, basically. And I loved a vintage dress with like tights that would inevitably get ripped up, and then like Mary Jane shoes, or like some kind of schoolgirl type shoe, and you know, just those kinds of iconic indie girl moments. I would want to be like at a music festival with a flannel on a PBR. And it's funny because I think of some of those icons, and obviously like I think Alexa Chung recently did a Vogue article about turning 40. So she's about 10 years on from me. And I think it's inevitable that like I've looked up to her style for that long, because I still feel like even as I've figured out more of what's me, that's someone who I still look to for style inspiration for sure. Do you remember the book she published back then? It Girl. She's published a fashion book. Yeah, it was.
I'll have to check it out.
You have to check it out. It's iconic. I have it on my bookshelf. And I think it came out like when I was like 22. And that was it for me. It was like music, indie music, and vintage. And I think it makes sense now that I've come into my personal style a little bit more. Like those references totally make sense. I've just figured out how to express it in a way that's more like me, more personally me.
I feel like for me, I mean, it's a little bit more cringy than that, but for me, like, I think I had the Teen Vogue fashion handbook. Now that you bring that up, I feel like I did pick up fashion books back then, but now I can't say I have a single. It's kind of crazy how I feel like back then magazines and books, or just like physical things, were more appreciated.
No, I mean you're totally right. It's all on our phones now. But I think we're gonna swing back because like Nylon Mag just announced they're coming back in print, which is
No, I
exciting.
saw that.
So I think the swing back will come because it always does. Like even if you think about like tech always has that swing. Like indie girls in my era were into records and tape decks. And then like now it's like everybody wants the iPods and the corded headphones and stuff. And so it'll swing back. I think there will be a resurgence of print.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel that because my sister does vintage camera stuff.
Oh yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, and so it's been interesting kind of seeing like that side of the vintage collectors, because when we're at markets, I feel like it's cool seeing the range of people that come to look at the cameras. Like it's not just young kids wanting to get like their digis. Just so interesting seeing the different generations and how they respond to seeing like because we do like point and shoot. Some are like like antique cameras, stuff that I wouldn't even know how to
Yeah.
use.
But
And
it's like
how
going back to that era of like MySpace era when you had a digital camera in your bag every night you went out, like I
yeah.
think that swing is happening or has happened.
Yeah, even just how people like express themselves, like, because I think about like I had the MySpace era, yeah, with the digi, taking the mirror picture with the flash on, and then like the Tumblr era was kind of when I was getting into like doing Polaroids, or like similarly, I started using like disposable cameras instead of like an actual. Yeah, that's so interesting, even through like not necessarily social media, but just like expressing yourself in like a art form way, I guess.
It always cycles. People are always, because it's nostalgia. We look back to like what we didn't exactly live through, but like can create these like rosy nostalgic memories about.
I've been reading things recently where nostalgia is actually like good for your mental health. It's like a way for people to like, remember who they are and like be in touch with that, and then like figure out how to like move forward because you like know who you are, if that makes sense.
I like that. I'm a Cancer sun. I collect vintage, so like nostalgia runs deep within me.
No, I feel like that makes sense. Like what would you say are some of your most special pieces of nostalgia that you have?
Ooh, for me, it's definitely like any pieces that have connections to people that I know or, family members. So I have my dad's Letterman jacket from when he was in high school. I
Mm.
love that. I have my grandma's locket, and it actually has a baby picture of me in it, which is really
Oh,
cute. So those, yeah, it's just happy memories and like for times that I didn't live through, but I think that it makes me think of those people.
I feel like it's important to have like little like connections to your past, or just things that like, at least for me, it like brings meaning to my life. Have it like
Yeah.
knowing you're like passing it on, or I don't know, yeah, just feeling connected to something, I guess, is like the core of it.
Yeah, or even I was telling my mother-in-law that I really wanted to get a 90s leather Coach bag because I was like, I know they're really high quality and da da da. And she was like, oh my gosh, like I remember 90s Coach. And it's just fun memories. And then I was like showing her the ones I was looking at on eBay and things like that. And she's like, oh, I think that's the one that I had. And, it brings out memory in people. And I think it's really fun. They say it's actually very therapeutic for elder care to like walk around a vintage shop and just like
Oh.
vocalize about memory, which I think is really sweet.
My grandparents are like in their 90s, and honestly they're very healthy and they remember a lot of things. So I'm trying to use that to my advantage
Yeah.
by like showing them stuff that like I collect or whatever, and ask them like, did you guys ever wear stuff like this? Or yeah, I don't know, that's something that I'm really trying to like explore, especially because like they're still around, still healthy, and I feel like I'm lucky in that sense. I feel like it's a way that I'm like trying to connect with them and their history, I guess, if that
Oh,
makes sense.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to talk about like your podcasting journey, because I'm like, so I don't know, I've just been so fascinated by it because it's something that I've always wanted to like dive into, but for some reason have been nervous about it. So yeah, I guess I just want to know like what sparked that within you, and like how did you get started with it?
Yeah, totally. So basically thinking back to like I was into thrifting and vintage, and like I said, I was just kind of into it for a while. I hadn't necessarily connected it to like values. But then I would say toward the end of my time in college, I did start to make a connection to values. So my grandma was a really important part of my upbringing, and she was like a single mom, raised 6 kids. She worked in a factory and she was a union organizer. And so she would always talk to me about union organizing and how they would fight for higher wages or worker protections. And I grew up with those stories. And around the time that I was getting out of college was when the 2013 Rana Plaza factory collapsed in Bangladesh. And it's a garment worker factory that killed over 1,000 people. And most of the people working in the garment industry are young women, young moms. And I just like could not unsee. My grandma didn't work in a garment factory. She worked in a plastics factory, but I just like couldn't unsee those values that I had grown grown up with from what had happened. And so from there, I never had this like dramatic I'm quitting fast fashion moment because like I said, I had already kind of been in that world. I just didn't connect it to something that was like important to me for a deeper reason. And so from that moment, that's kind of when that clicked into place for me. And I really started to go down the like sustainable fashion rabbit hole. But I feel like back then in the say it's like 2015 or something like that, sustainable fashion was very neutral, minimal, decluttering, zero waste. And I think all of that is great, but I didn't resonate with that aesthetic. I wasn't like shopping at sustainable brands or like particularly minimalist. Like I said, I was a thrifter and I saw that fell into that value system, but like I wasn't seeing that represented as much in the community. And that feels crazy to say now because I feel like it's totally different now. But back then, I wasn't seeing as much of that more like eclectic type of point of view focused on secondhand. And so I was really into podcasts. I would say I started getting really into podcasts probably around like 2017-ish, listening to tons of podcasts and tons about sustainability. But again, like wasn't seeing my perspective of being a secondhand shopper necessarily reflected in that. And so I was like, okay, I remember I was on a trip. My husband and I had gone backpacking in Europe for like a month. And I remember being on a train and I would listen to podcasts a lot while I was on the train. And I was like, I just wish I could find like a podcast that interviewed vintage sellers. And I couldn't find one at the time. And so I was like, okay, I'm just going to see. Maybe it'll just be like a limited thing that I'll do just for fun. And I started to like write down names of people that I would want to interview. And I was like, if I can get like 5 to 10 of these people to agree to do an interview with me, then I'll just do it and it'll just be fun. And it'll be like a way for me to like chat about something that I care about. And I did that, got home from that trip, like fall of 2018. I got the equipment. Podcasting equipment is really affordable, which is so awesome. Like I think I spent less than $100 on the equipment. And some of it I even got like secondhand. And it's, I just like taught myself how to do it. And it was really entertaining. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced with YouTube, like it can be just interesting to teach yourself a new skill. And so I did that. And then I just like found that I loved interviewing people. And it totally makes sense. Like I was a lit major in college. I've studied writing. Like I've always wanted to be in like the writing journalistic space. And so it totally made sense. And I was just like, this is it. Like I found what I was kind of meant to be doing because I love this subject. And I also love like helping people tell their stories. And so I did those first couple episodes and then I just like literally kept doing it and have never looked back. It's been so great. And I think like you should totally start if you are interested in it.
Yeah, before I've always like thrifted, I guess, since like middle school. But before that, when I was in my Tumblr era, I was kind of similar as you in the sense of like the music festival girl. And I like the quiet girl that just liked to go to these things by myself and like just take photos of like the scene of everything. Like I like to dress up, but I just kind of liked moving in my own lane and taking photos. And then I realized I could do it for not like for a living because I wasn't getting paid, but like festivals or concerts or whatever would let me go for free if I would like take photos and stuff. And so then I applied to start writing for a blog and then I started interviewing artists. So I think in a similar way, randomly realized I liked that whole, I guess, learning about people. And then, also like having people like tell their story. I think it's like obviously goes hand in hand, but I feel like that process is very like, it's like fun. And I just like learning things through people, if that makes sense.
Totally. I think you'd love it. You ask great questions. I think, and you've already done YouTube. So you get like, it's, yes, a lot of work goes into it and you have to teach yourself how to do it and things like that. And if you view that as like a fun challenge, then I think it's really fun. But yeah, that's the cool thing about it. People's stories are fascinating and it's fun to hear them. I learn something from everybody I talk to. It's just a very rewarding creating.
Yeah. Okay. On the other end, because this has just been something for me with YouTube where I feel like I'll be really good and consistent, but then I'll like experience a burnout. Like, cause you've been doing this for like at least 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you maintain your balance?
It's of course challenging, and like my best advice for people, I may have to help my dog with something. He has a
No
leg
worries.
injury and he needs to get up
Oh,
onto his couch. He's so sweet. I wish you could see him, but he just needed a little lift. Avoiding burnout as a creator. I mean, yeah, I'm sure you get it. Like, and doing balancing the vintage world and creating, like it's challenging to have a lot of things that you're juggling. And I think my best advice is try to have a schedule that you feel like you can stick to. So like you don't have to publish every week if that's not reasonable for you. Do what feels reasonable to you. Build in time off, because I think that time, so like my podcast is about to go on like a holiday season break for December and for January. And I always try to build that in, because you have to have time away from it, because if you don't have breaks, then you're just going to do what feels the most efficient to create, because you can do it quickly. And then it's going to feel lackluster. Like you're just going to be like trying to get an episode out every week. So you need that time away so that you can like be creative and research guests and get excited about it. So every like holiday, and then in July or on my birthday, I usually like take a month off. And I think that's important to do, because it just keeps it interesting. And smaller breaks, of course, too. Like try to, even if your weekend is not a Saturday, Sunday, like try to find a weekend in your week that you aren't, thinking about this or working, and just allow yourself to have that, and try not to push yourself too hard, because I think that's where burnout happens, is where you're like, it has to be this way, it has to be out every week, and like that's just not always realistic.
I feel like hearing you talk, because I'm a Capricorn, so you're like my opposite on the spectrum. I know we're like sister signs. I hear your advice like speaking to my soul.
Good.
And I think that's something that is important, like as a creator, to learn how to take breaks, but that's something that I have a really hard time with. I feel like I see so many creators come up and fall off, you know what I mean? Seeing your longevity and hearing your advice is like, yeah, very nice.
It's so important. And I also feel like you have to figure out what works for you, and it's not going to look the same as everybody else. Like, for example, like my husband has always worked in the service industry. So I might not take weekends as like a weekend. I might do it on a Monday or whatever, and I think that's okay. And like, if you prefer to get up earlier or work later in the day, like give yourself, embrace the fact that as a creator, you have that flexibility. And, if you prefer to like work a little bit every day, but work shorter days, like figure out what works for you so that you can have rest time. It doesn't have to be the same as what everyone else's looks like, but you deserve to have rest time like everyone else.
I think that's what the beauty and also like the hard thing about being like a creator. Sometimes I think it's like there's too much freedom. And I think for me, I've been trying to figure out structure to have the freedom, if that makes sense. There's like that weird balance where it's like you have like, it's all up to you, right? It's all up to you. But like you said, it's like building in your it's like disciplined freedom.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Yes, that's the key to being a successful creator, right? Or a happy creator, however you want to
because I think especially like with the internet and how I think things have been, I guess, like increasing in the sense of not like, I don't know, I hate saying things are so saturated, but it feels that way sometimes. And so I think it's really about like not being consumed with what other people are doing, and genuinely, like you're saying, doing what feels right to you and taking that time to figure out whatever works for you as a creator.
Yes, 100%. And along those lines, another creator tip that I have is to not like overconsume content within your genre, because then you find yourself naturally imitating or envying what others are doing. So like, I don't tend to listen to a ton of sustainable fashion podcasts necessarily, but I listen to like interview podcasts from a ton of other different genres and allow myself to get inspiration and enthusiasm for that. But I want to keep my sense of individuality, and I don't want to feel like, oh, that person did X, so I should do X. And so I do think that that can help, because the internet is so algorithmic that it tries to feed us what it thinks is like exactly like us. And I don't think that it's beneficial to just see people who are similar to you all the time, doing similar things to you all the time.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's such a good point, because I think I fell into that during quarantine and stuff. And I think now I've kind of been going back to who I am, in the sense of like, yeah, like I like to listen to music interviews. Like I like to listen to artists talking about their journey. And I feel like that's how, you're right. It's hard when you get so cornered in a space. It's like there's no way to kind of like break free of it. Like I think me living in LA, sometimes I feel so stuck in LA, in this bubble. It's probably like how people felt in high school, you know what I mean, when you're like I don't know, especially if you don't fit in, or you don't like have the popular friend groups or whatever. And then when I go home or visit family in Northern California, I feel like it always resets me.
Yep. It's that different source of inspiration. Like everybody gets inspiration from somewhere, and you should still be seeking creative inspiration. But I think it's healthier sometimes to seek inspiration that looks different from what you're doing, and have your peers and like champion what they're doing, and like, you know, be excited about it. But when you're, you know, soaking up, just be careful like what inspiration you're soaking up. And I think that's also helpful to the longevity thing, because you don't get comparisonitis.
Yeah, no, yeah, that is facts for sure. Okay, so one thing I'm wondering, how do you, I mean, I know there's like so many people within the space. So like, how do you go about like picking your guests? I know it's probably a lot of things, but yeah, I just want to hear that process.
Well, I try to have as many different perspectives on my show as I can. So that can be like vintage sellers, but also stylists or people who just love thrift and vintage. But then I think also too, what I've tried to show with Preloved podcast is that the secondhand industry is a lot more massive global industry, and is so much more diverse and varied than I think we're aware of, if our experience interacting with it is like taking a bag to Goodwill or buying something at Goodwill, you know, like there's sorters and recyclers and upcyclers and exporters and bulk warehouses and all over the world. And everybody has a unique role that they play in this giant secondhand ecosystem. And I think that's really fascinating. And so I've tried to do that on my show, tried to have people from, you know, places around the world as much as I can. I really enjoyed the episodes that I've done with folks from the Orr Foundation in Accra, Ghana, about the secondhand industry there. I love when I can bring in different global perspectives or show a point of view about the secondhand industry that people wouldn't have necessarily just experienced on their own, or my listeners in America maybe wouldn't have necessarily experienced.
Yeah, no, I feel like that's something that I've been also thinking about too, because when I first started my channel, it was all about like buying bulk vintage and like doing the flea market stuff. And I think at the time, like there wasn't as much content about that stuff. Like I've been thinking about literally along those same lines of like, yeah, like exposing how this is like such a global experience, and the business is honestly like way bigger than most people think and know. And yeah, I've been trying to think about how I wanted to go about that too. I was talking to people at Fleek. I don't know if you've heard of Fleek. Yeah, they just say how they work with like a lot of suppliers in Pakistan, and like basically we were pitching like how to humanize what's going on over there and to show what that process is like. But yeah, I don't know. That fell off. I've been like playing with diving into that and learning more, because I don't actually know, you know, I just know through like what people have told me about things happening abroad. But yeah, I've been wanting to tackle more of that, because I think that's important, because we don't know, we just assume, you know.
Yeah. And also just I love telling the stories of, even here in the States, like I said, like I'm from Iowa, so vintage sellers who are all over, you know, not necessarily just in the big cities or
Yeah,
like
yeah.
shows, or like people who've been doing this for a long time, you know, like there are people who've been doing shows for 20, 30 years. And like, I think it's really cool to hear their story and how they've seen it change. And so just all the different perspectives within the secondhand industry and giving people that place to tell their story.
Yeah, no, I think that's important because
100%.
so I guess since you're constantly picking people's brains about the fashion space, I guess what are things you would like to see happening with the future of sustainable fashion?
Yeah, so I think a big conversation that the sustainable fashion space will have or needs to have is we talk a lot about how we're going to shift from the linear model of like making, taking, using, wasting an item to how we're going to shift to a circular model where that item or those raw materials get continually reused. And I was recently listening to Liz Ricketts speak at the Business of Fashion Summit, and she was talking about how we're having a difficult time in fashion making that transition because the fashion is so disposable. And I think about a lot how I hear people complaining about Shein filling up the thrift stores and no one wants it. And like that's the clearest example under the sun. If the resource is too disposable for it to make sense to recirculate, then it's simply not going to recirculate. Like there's not going to, a customer is not going to appear for it. And so we have to figure out how to reshape the fashion industry to be focused on not just churning out mass volumes of clothes, which is the current model of fast fashion, and how fast fashion businesses continue to grow is just through volume, into transitioning into fewer and better, which is how clothing used to be made. And that's why we used to have decent vintage and we don't anymore. And I think people know that, but like they don't always make that connection when they have that complaint that like it's not just because it's like a lower quality, it's because of the volume, you know, and there's no way to make that volume at that quality. Like we used to consume fashion, fewer items, higher quality, slower buying. We can't just like copy paste the way that we're doing things onto the old model of how it used to exist. Like there has to be a mindset shift and a business model shift in order for that to happen. And I think that's the big conversation that we're going to see the sustainable fashion space having, is what the shift looks like from going from disposable clothing to valuing clothing, valuable clothing. And I think that's where we're going to have to go.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy because I used to like work for a bunch of different fashion brands, like in marketing. I did Depop on the side. That was kind of like my, like when I first moved to LA, that was like my life. And I wanted to like work at all these different fashion companies so I could learn how to have my own brand, basically. Right. And so I think that was very eye-opening for me because it's not like I had a long fashion career, but like I was probably working for like 5 years. I think I worked for maybe 3 or 4 different brands within those years. And they were all brands that like I at the time like dreamed of working for, like really wanted to work for them, even interned at one of them to like get a job there, that kind of a track. But then every company that I worked for, it was always kind of this like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like when you realize Santa isn't real kind of thing.
Yeah,
Like
a
it was kind of,
disillusionment, like the curtain is lifted. Yeah.
yeah, and how no matter how much I thought I believed in a brand and then like going and working on the inside, and I think that was just what pushed me to do Nostalgic Threads. And I feel like even that is something that I'm like constantly figuring out. I think it's tough when people are in the fashion space that only care about the money. I think that's ultimately like, and they're the ones that probably have the money to like fund all these. This is kind of like the conversation I want to start pushing like through doing these interviews, is like how do we get consumers to truly mindfully consume again, because so many companies are these machines that like are never going to put an end to what we're trying to do, I guess.
Yeah, because what's the motivation? They're making plenty of money off of doing it that way. So why go
Why?
through a
Yeah.
business model shift? I always recommend people to do, you know, some sort of no new clothes challenge or no buy period to just take a breather. You know, people say that it takes about 3 months for like a habit to kick in. So if you can do 3 months, I think sometimes people are like, New Year's resolution, it's got to be a year. But like, you know, if you can do it for summer, it will help you make that mindset shift if you can stick to it realistically. And that's not to say that it's all on the consumers, because again, this is like a business model and like a systems problem. But if we're talking about how do you make that shift into buying less, looking for quality, rejecting the haul mindset, like I think that there is work psychologically that we can do to make that happen. And that's always my best advice for people. And then trying to stick to secondhand, because I think secondhand teaches you a lot of those mindset things like patience and creativity and slowness and looking for quality and all of those things. So I think it goes hand in hand.
Literally putting in the work for your stuff, basically. Like,
Yeah. It's okay. Like, it's not, you know, not saying like it takes too long as like a negative thing.
yeah.
Reframing that to yourself if you can, to be like, I might have to put in the effort, but I am going to wait until I can find the thing that is perfect for me, that I no longer have to go out looking for its replacement because I figured
Love
out.
it.
Yeah, I loved it and I figured out what it was, you know?
Well, that's so important because I think about how, I don't know, just literally thinking about like Amazon or just being able to get things instantly. And the internet has kind of like pushed us into that
Instant
direction.
gratification.
Yeah, because I think that's kind of like the work we do at the flea market, you know, with like explaining to people. I don't know, that's like a whole nother conversation, but just like how like people price things the way they do and things like that. And like, sure, sometimes things are madly overpriced or whatever, but like I have the both sides of it where it's like, sure, there's that, but also like how much time did they put in to find it, all this stuff. And I think it's just more pushing people to being like, how much do you really want this kind of thing?
Yep. And being okay, because again, it's that copy paste. Like people think that they should be able to buy secondhand items at the same volume and rate that they're buying fast fashion. And you have to become okay with the fact that that math won't math. Like, you know, that it's going to take longer and that's okay. And that you might spend a little bit more on a certain piece, which, you know, and maybe it's because I live in the Midwest, but like I still find secondhand fashion to be, I look at some of these prices that fast fashion brands are selling things for, like a Zara or something, and I'm like, you're selling this polyester coat for $100? Like I can find a beautiful Pendleton wool coat for less than that vintage. But anyway, that's a whole separate rant. But like
No,
becoming okay with that new way of thinking, because you can't take it all with you and have it just be like work in a secondhand ecosystem. I think that's part of the process.
Yeah, no, I think now, like post COVID, maybe I just have like PTSD from all the people getting mad at Depop or Depop sellers or whatever. But that's just a conversation I've always wanted to like have, but like not in a way where it's in a snarky way. Like it's just a conversation that, at least to me, felt like it was never fully expressed. And so I felt like as a Depop seller, we just kind of had to take the hit in a way. Like I didn't really know how to go about that. So, you know, that inspired me. Brooke, our next guest, is somebody that I feel like we could dive deep into kind of like that stuff, because that's always been something that's been interesting to me. Like, how do you
Oh yeah. And I have this whole theory that like the reason that Depop girlies pricing or whatever was like so easy for people to make fun of is because it's so easy for people to make fun of young women running businesses. Like they just find that so natural and easy, and that should be interrogated a little bit. I know that it's not only, you know, young women on Depop or whatever, but I just feel like that instinct is within a lot of people, and that should be examined because it doesn't seem to come out in other corners of the secondhand ecosystem quite as often. And just realizing that there is like literally no scarcity of clothing, that I think clothing that exists on the planet today could last the next 6 generations. Like And so there is no scarcity, and we don't need to be fighting amongst our peers when there are billionaires who are cranking out all of these volumes and creating this problem that we live in. And if we just like punched up, you know, for a moment, maybe we could actually do something about dismantling that problem that we all agree we have.
Yeah, no, that's so funny. I was talking to my uncle. He doesn't know anything about fashion, anything. But we always like banter about stuff because I feel like we just come from completely different worlds. And then basically I was just like, women don't run the fashion industry. If you actually like, I feel like
the CEOs, not the people with the money.
And he was blown. Oh, he's like, what do you mean? Like, I feel like the women are running circles like in the fashion industry, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, that's what they make it look like. They want to use our faces, they want to use our beauty to sell stuff. But when it comes down to it, like, yeah, that's just like a whole freaking rabbit hole. But like, yeah, it's terrible, honestly. And it's mostly white men. It's all like every company I worked for, the CEO was a white man. All the employees were women, like literally every single one. And that was just something that I know, like, I can't be the only one who's experienced that through the fashion industry, but it's just crazy when going to like my home family dinner and then getting their perspective on the fashion industry. I'm just like, yeah, wow, like it's really not like that. That's why, like, this is why I'm doing my own thing, because I tried to figure out a way and make changes within the system itself. I mean, in my experience, I feel like you have to kind of do your own thing to make the changes happen.
And that's why we have to keep having conversations like this. You know, like just to keep bringing these ideas up and getting more people to be a part of it.
Yeah, and just like thinking about it. And so that's why, like, yeah, I've always, ever since coming into your space, appreciated what you do and how you interview. I feel like you don't even just interview like people with platforms, you interview all types of people. And I think that is also what's so important, like not doing things for the views or the clickbait or whatever, but just giving like real people's like perspective.
Oh, well, thank you. And no, I'm cheering you on. I'm so excited for this, and I'm so excited to see who else you interview, and it's going to be awesome.
So I guess before we go, like, is there anything that you want to share about your podcast? I know you're taking a break.
Yeah, so yes, I'm taking a little holiday break, but new episodes will be back in the first part of 2024. But there's over 200 episodes in the archives. So there's lots of goodies there, so you can do some catching up. And then you can also find me across the internet. I'm Emily Stochl, Stochl. And thank you so much for having me.
No, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you're like one of my first ones, because I was like,
honor.
we have to launch with another podcaster.
An honor. Thank you. I think you're gonna get a visit from my cat. He's poking his head in the corner. He's great. We'll see. We'll see.
We'll say our goodbyes.
Yeah, we'll say our goodbye.
Kitties.
Okay.
Oh, and they're both orange cats.
Yeah.
You don't like it. That's like the best way to end it, honestly. Have a good one. Hope you have a good holiday break. And I'm sure we'll talk soon.
Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.